These are 7 signs that God may be testing you right now, and understanding them could completely change how you interpret what you're walking through. Most people hit a hard season and immediately ask one of 2 questions. What did I do wrong? Or where is God in all of this? But there's a third question that almost never gets asked, and it may be the most honest one. What is God trying to produce in me through this? That's what this video is about, not a polished message that skates past real pain, but a grounded, direct look at what divine testing actually is and how to recognize it when you're standing in the middle of it. Before the 7 signs, one thing needs to be established, because a widespread misunderstanding about this topic does real damage to people who are already hurting. Divine testing is not the same as temptation, and Scripture draws a hard line between them. James 1:13 states it plainly. God cannot be tempted by evil, and he does not tempt anyone. Temptation pulls a person toward destruction. Testing, by contrast, works in the opposite direction, designed to strengthen, refine, and surface who you actually are, not the version you perform when everything is going well. The Hebrew word used in Genesis 22 is nasa, meaning to test, try, or prove. The Greek word used in Romans 5 is dokime, describing character that has been proven through testing and come out the other side. These are not passive words. They describe something intentional, something with direction, and the Latin root of the English word tribulation tells the same story. Tribulum was a farming tool, a threshing instrument used to separate grain from chaff, and the metaphor is precise. What testing removes from you is what was never worth keeping, and what it reveals is what was there all along. The first sign is sudden, unexpected loss, the kind that arrives without warning and doesn't come with an explanation attached. Job's story is the clearest example Scripture offers, and what makes it so difficult to argue with is what God said about Job before any of it happened. Job 1:3 describes him as the greatest man among all the people of the East. Wealth, family, standing, everything intact. Then Job 1:13 through 19 records how his children, his livestock, and eventually his health were stripped away in a sequence of events that gave him no time to prepare. And Job 1:8, the verse that reframes everything, has God himself calling Job blameless and upright before a single trial began. That detail matters because one of the most harmful ideas circulating in some Christian spaces is the assumption that suffering signals personal failure, that if something has collapsed in your life, you must have caused it. Job directly dismantles that assumption. The testing was not punishment, it was a proving. Hebrews 12:6 names the underlying reality. The Lord disciplines those he loves. Sudden disruption, as destabilizing as it feels, can be one of the clearest indicators that God has his attention fixed on your life. The second sign is repeated obstacles, arriving even when you are doing everything right. And this one carries a particular frustration because the math doesn't add up. Joseph's life is where Scripture gives us the fullest picture of this pattern, and the details are worth sitting with. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, he served faithfully in Potiphar's house, only to end up in prison on a false accusation from Potiphar's wife. Inside that prison, he interpreted the cupbearer's dream accurately, which should have been the moment things turned. Genesis 40:23 records what happened next. The cupbearer forgot him entirely, and Joseph remained in that cell for 2 more years. 2 years of waiting after doing something right, after faithfully using what God had given him. Psalm 34:19 names this pattern without softening it. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. The word many is doing real work in that verse. It's not describing 1 or 2 setbacks before things resolve. It's acknowledging that repeated hardship is woven into the journey of someone living with integrity. And this is where it gets clarifying. If you keep hitting walls despite faithful effort, that resistance itself may be the signal that something is being built in you that only resistance can build. The third sign is one most people carry quietly. That feeling of spiritual dryness, of prayers that seem to bounce back, of a distance from God that no amount of effort seems to close. That experience has a name and a long history behind it. The Spanish mystic St. John of the Cross, who lived from 1542 to 1591, wrote about it in his poem Noche Oscura del Alma, around 1578 to 1579. And here's what most people don't know about those pages. He wrote them while imprisoned by his own Carmelite brothers in Toledo, Spain. He wasn't describing the dark night from a place of comfort. He was writing from inside it, in a cell, which gives those words a weight that armchair theology rarely achieves. And then there's Mother Teresa. In 2007, private letters compiled by Father Brian Kolodieschuk were published in a book called Come Be My Light. And those letters revealed something that stunned people. Nearly 50 years of spiritual dryness, decades of feeling cut off from God, running alongside the most publicly visible Christian service of the 20th century. 50 years, not a rough patch. Psalm 22 opens with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" A cry that David wrote, that Jesus later spoke from the cross, and that generations of believers have recognized as their own voice. Spiritual distance is not evidence that God has withdrawn. Across some of the most documented lives of faith ever recorded, that distance turned out to be the very ground where the deepest character took root. The fourth sign is relational strain. The people closest to you behaving in ways that cut the deepest, or relationships you depended on fracturing without warning. Testing rarely happens in a vacuum, and Scripture's examples make clear that the trial almost always runs through people. Abraham's test in Genesis 22 landed precisely where it would hurt most. Not a stranger, not a possession, but Isaac, his son, the person he loved above everything else. The weight of that test existed because of the relationship, not in spite of it. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, the people who should have protected him. David spent years fleeing Saul, a man he had served faithfully. Paul writes in 2 Timothy 4:16 that at his first defense, no one came to stand with him. Everyone deserted him, which, coming from the man who built the early church across multiple continents, is a striking thing to admit. Proverbs 17:17 frames the purpose inside the pain. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. What adversity does to relationships is reveal them, and both outcomes carry information. The relationships that hold are proven. The ones that don't, that revelation, painful as it arrives, is its own kind of gift. And this is the part worth holding on to. If your relationships are under unusual strain right now and you can't fully explain why, the test may not be about those relationships at all. It may be about what God is forming in you through the tension they create. The fifth sign is financial or material pressure that feels out of proportion to your circumstances. And this one needs careful framing because not every financial difficulty carries spiritual weight in the same way. What Scripture does consistently is show God using material reduction to surface what a person actually trusts. Deuteronomy 8:2 and 3 gives one of the most direct explanations of this in the entire Bible. Speaking of Israel's 40 years in the wilderness, God states plainly that He led them through that journey specifically to humble them and test them, including through hunger, before providing manna. The hunger was not an oversight. It was the mechanism of the test, and the provision that followed was connected to what the pressure had produced in them first. Job, described as the wealthiest man in his region, lost everything materially, and Job 42:10 records that what came after was restoration doubled. Proverbs 38:9 captures the full tension in a prayer from a man named Agur, who asks God for neither poverty nor wealth, because he recognized that both extremes carry their own kind of spiritual exposure. Too little, and you may curse God. Too much, and He may slip from the center of your attention entirely. If you're in a season of financial pressure and you've been handling it with integrity, that pressure may be accomplishing something in your character that a stable bank account never could. The sixth sign is feeling pushed past what you can handle, and most people treat that feeling as evidence that something has gone catastrophically wrong. But here's the thing, Paul treats it entirely differently, and he writes from experience, not theory. 2 Corinthians 1:8 and 9 contain some of the most raw language in the New Testament, where Paul writes, "We were under great pressure far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself." Not metaphor, not dramatic framing. This is the man who wrote most of the New Testament describing a moment where nothing was left. He goes on to name the purpose it happened so that we might not rely on ourselves but on God who raises the dead. Being pushed past your limit is designed to relocate where your trust actually lives. 1 Corinthians 10:13 is one of the most quoted verses in Christian resilience literature, and it holds up under pressure. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Read carefully. That verse doesn't promise the weight will feel bearable. What it says is that God is managing the boundary of it, which is a different and more demanding claim. Consider Elijah. After his greatest spiritual victory, he collapsed under a tree and prayed to die. That's 1 Kings 19:4, the prophet at absolute zero. God's response was not correction or rebuke. Rest came first, then food, then gentle restoration. The breaking point in the pattern Scripture shows us repeatedly is not where the story ends. Most of the time, it's where the real story begins. The seventh sign is unexplained waiting, holding a promise, a calling, or a clear direction from God while nothing around you moves and no explanation arrives. Waiting may be the hardest of the seven because it's passive, and there's no action available to manage the discomfort. Loss can be grieved actively. Obstacles can be pressed against. Waiting just requires you to be still while every instinct you have is telling you to move. Abraham received God's promise of a son at approximately 75 years old, and Isaac arrived when Abraham was approximately 100. 25 years between the word and its fulfillment. 25 years of holding something God had said that hadn't yet materialized in the visible world. Israel's wait was longer still. 430 years in Egyptian bondage before deliverance came, and that timeline is recorded in Exodus 12:40 and 41. Habakkuk 2:3 carries the tension of that without resolving it too quickly. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Linger, but not delay. The paradox is intentional, pointing to a timing that belongs to God rather than to the calendar, and Isaiah 40:31 names what the waiting actually produces. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. The silence is not empty, and the waiting is not wasted. Something is being renewed in you during that season that could not be renewed any other way, and the length of the wait is not an accident. 7 signs, then. Sudden, unexpected loss, repeated obstacles despite doing right, spiritual dryness, relational strain, financial pressure, being pushed past your limits, and seasons of unexplained waiting. None of these feel like gifts while you're inside them, and naming them as signs of divine testing isn't meant to minimize how much they cost. C.S. Lewis wrote in The Problem of Pain in 1940 that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. The pain is not the problem, it is frequently the means of communication, and the difference between those two things changes everything about how you carry it. The word tribulum, the farming tool that gave us our word tribulation, was never designed to destroy what it touched. Its purpose was to free the grain from everything surrounding it that had no business being there. Abraham, Job, Joseph, Moses, David, Elijah, Paul. The pattern across every one of those lives is the same. Testing preceded purpose, consistently, without exception. 1 Corinthians 10:13 remains the anchor underneath all of it. God is faithful. He is not unaware of where you are, and He has not lost track of where He is taking you. The test is not the destination. It is the preparation for it, and there is a difference between the two that is worth holding on to in the long seasons when you cannot yet see the other side. If this gave you something to hold on to, share it with someone who's in a hard season, and subscribe for more content like this coming soon.